Paranormal Dimensions is a regular feature on Mondays on the Paranormal UK radio network.
This is Malcolm Robinson and you're listening to the Paranormal UK radio network, the UK's biggest paranormal network, and this is Paranormal Dimensions with David Young.
Hello and welcome to the show. Thank you for that intro, Malcolm. Now, today's guest is Neil Spring, who writes psychological thrillers, many of which are inspired by real events. His debut novel, The Ghost Hunters, was adapted into a critically acclaimed television drama for ITV. His second novel, The Watchers, concerns UFO sightings during the Cold War. In 2017, he published The Lost Village, a ghost story about the haunting of the abandoned Imber village. The Burning House, set on the shores of Loch Ness, is his fourth novel. And he's also just completed his fifth novel, which will be coming out later this year. So, welcome to the show, Neil Spring. Hello, Neil. Welcome to the show.
Delighted to be here. Thank you very much for having me.
Oh, it's been, as I said, I've been looking forward to this very much. I did explain to you just now, off air, that I've actually started reading. Well, actually, I've finished Ghost Hunters. I'm actually reading The Watchers at the moment.
Oh, great.
I'm getting quite. I think that what you did with Ghost Hunters is absolutely fantastic. You know, I got quite intrigued. I was explaining to you that I don't read much fiction. I used to many years ago, but I try to stay with non-fiction so much. But I got so intrigued with it because you've got such a lot of non-fiction in it, really, mixed with the fiction, and it's very hard to distinguish the two.
Yeah, and I think it's great to hear that, because I think when you're writing a book, a novel, obviously your primary concern is to entertain. But when I came to the story of Harry Price and the haunting of Borley Rectory, what amazed me from the outset was that actually everybody in paranormal circles is familiar with the story. But what amazed me was that the story of the people who lived it and their lives and how they were embroiled with one another, and actually what was driving Harry Price, had never really been told in fiction. And it seemed to me such an obvious thing, I just couldn't understand why that had never been done.
Yeah, I can't. It's a fantastic idea.
Yeah, but it's an awful lot of research, but you have to balance. I think the aim for the book was very much to leave the reader thinking, well, what's real and what isn't real, and
exactly
can I go away?
That's exactly where I was.
Right, and there's been so much. I wanted to honour the work that's been done by so many dedicated paranormal researchers who have, slaved over many, many books and documents researching what happened at Borley, and to do their work justice as well. And I hope that came through.
Oh, definitely. It certainly did with me. I mean, I the work that you've put into this, the research, I can see it really stands out a mile. As I say, you've brought the characters to life. Or Harry Price was the true character, and the lady Sarah Gray that was working with him, although it's a fictional name, it was actually a real person.
That's right. So I became aware of, I don't know if you're familiar, he had a secretary called Lucy Kay.
Yep.
And they had an interesting sort of relationship, and there's been some speculation whether she had a child by him or not.
Right.
That's never been completely determined. But I was doing some research at the Senate House Library, which is, of course, the home to the largest magical and occult library in the world, which is the library that Harry Price left to the University of London. And it was there when I discovered actually a few pages of an article that she had written talking about what it was like to go to work in what she called the Ghost Factory, which was her Harry Price's laboratory. And I thought, well, actually, that is a really interesting way in to Harry's life through the eyes of his secretary.
Yeah, definitely, yeah.
And that's where the narration came from.
It does actually. I mean, as I started,
because,
I thought Sarah Gray was actually the real. Obviously, it is sort of, you're looking through her eyes, and I actually thought that she was the real character. But as I realised when I got to the end, actually, that you based it on a true character, but the name was different.
Yeah, that's right. Because I think. And, they did that for all sorts of reasons, because it allows you to, there's a sequel to the book called The Lost Village, which is an opportunity.
That's right. I've got that one to read after the Watchers, so I'm looking forward to that.
Oh, great, good. But, Borley Rectory is a very, it's just become a legend now, in the sense that I don't think it's in any way anyone will ever get to the bottom of what was purportedly happening there.
No. Well, it does seem that things were happening there, but they probably, like a lot of things, got exaggerated.
Yes.
Like we've all seen the picture of the flying brick.
Well, indeed.
Which is a famous picture, isn't it?
I know, of course, and I know that was taken when there were builders on site, and they were clearing the site away. And yes, I think Harry Price did play up the mystery of it all, because he was a writer. And, I think I've done a fairly balanced assessment of most of the evidence.
Yeah.
And it seems to me that Marianne Foyster certainly was playing things up.
Yeah. He's a fascinating character anyway. Like you say, I'm very surprised why his character hasn't been taken up in some way. I mean, it'd make a great TV series, wouldn't it? Harry Price as a TV character.
Well, they did. ITV actually adapted this book and did a 2-hour film as Rafe Spall playing Harry. But although I think they did a good job with what they had, I think. They renamed it from the Ghost Hunters to Harry Price Ghost Hunter. Yeah. And of course, it was lovely having, your work adapted for the screen, but, unfortunately they didn't include Borley Rectory. No. which seemed to me a strange thing to do.
Yeah, it was very strange. I was going to ask you what was your opinion of that. Obviously you sort of kind of told me really that you were a bit disappointed with it. But,
I think it was useful to see. It was great seeing Harry and Sarah come alive. But I think that, The Haunting of Borley Rectory is the most famous ghost story ever, with the exception of the Amityville Haunting, which is equally contentious, I think. Except that Borley has it all. It has the English country setting. It has, the period feel. It has so many duplicitous and interesting characters.
It does, yeah. Like the late 20s, early 30s is a very sort of interesting period, like before the war and everything, wasn't it? It's
absolutely.
With all the old cars and obviously way before the internet and mobile phones and everything like that, people had to rely on conversation and letters and all the old things.
Well, of course, and also, it was a grieving nation. It was a nation that needed desperately to believe in something beyond, and well, I'm thinking, particularly the interwar period.
Yeah,
you can see why people looked for something else to believe in.
Yeah, what grabbed me also, I used to live in Halstead. I don't know if you know Halstead in Essex.
Yes.
Well, it wasn't far from Sudbury, and at the time I didn't actually realise that was so near to where Borley was. It never crossed my mind,
Gosh, it's not far away at all. Really.
No, it is. It was only about. In fact, I used to go shopping in Sudbury.
Well, it's a very picturesque place, but I don't know if you would be interested in hearing something peculiar that happened to me when I visited.
Absolutely, yeah.
And I'd like to say to your listeners, this is absolutely true. I made a trip when I was researching the book to Borley, and anyone who's been to Borley knows that there's a road called Hall Road, which approaches the site of the old rectory and the church. And we were driving in a car that was a convertible car. There were 3 of us in the car, and I was not driving, but I was giving directions, but I did not explain the history of this road or the things that have been purportedly seen or heard on it to anyone in the car. When we were driving up the road, the driver stopped the car and said, "Can you hear that?" I said, "Well, I couldn't hear anything." And he said, "I can hear something on the road." He said, "It sounds like he could hear horses."
Oh, wow. Yeah.
And he could hear movement of a vehicle in any event that we couldn't see. And I couldn't hear a thing. We got to and neither could the other person in the car. And when we got to the village, to Borley, it's more of a hamlet than a village, but we were in the churchyard, and all of us noticed that our phones weren't working. This is absolutely true. And our phones did work when we left the village.
Oh, that's strange. I was going to say, the batteries died, but they came back to life again.
They just didn't work. It was bizarre. It was absolutely bizarre. And there was a lady who was cleaning the churchyard, and she lived there, I think, and we asked her, what can you tell us about the things that happen, or purportedly happen here? And she said, "Well, if things happen here, I'm hardly likely to tell you if you're writing a book about it, right?" Which I understand. And
I think you do mention that at the back of the book, don't you?
There's a note at the back of the book that I go into some more detail on this for anyone who's interested. But she did say, I said, I described what we'd heard on the road, or what our driver had heard on the road. And her face just changed. And I can see her now looking at me, and she said, "Yes, people do keep saying that."
I mean, there is a lot of horses in that area, because people do there's a lot of livery yards and things, but obviously to hear a lot of carriage as well, that's quite different, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, it's a long time ago now, and I can't accurately describe to you from memory what the word he used. I want to say he said he heard chains, or he heard the movement of a vehicle, but whatever the most accurate account of what he said is in the book, which I don't have in front of me. So if anyone wants to check what I wrote there, that is the most accurate, not my memory now. But I will say I remember us thinking that was really weird. And I've been to Borley many times. I've never experienced anything myself unusual apart from what I've just described. But I think that, I might be wrong about this, but I think that the bungalow which was built on the site of the old rectory is currently for sale for quite a hefty price.
Right.
I might be wrong about that, but it's a curious little village, and I can tell you that I've met people in Sudbury on my trip who are convinced that there is something about the site of the old rectory that there is something strange about it. And of course, you run into the odd person who will say to you, "Oh no, of course the whole thing was a load of nonsense."
Yeah, I mean, there are people that just don't believe in ghosts, and that's it, and that's the end of it, isn't it? Yeah.
Well, exactly, and I don't know whether I believe in. I don't know. It depends what we define a ghost to be. But I do find it curious sometimes when you see paranormal investigators photographing what they describe as orbs, when quite often I think it's quite clear they're photographing pieces of dust which are catching the light.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if you know, but I live near Rendlesham Forest.
Oh, you do? Wonderful.
I have been there in the dead of night, and I've taken lots of pictures, and then most of them come out dark, black, just nothing. And,
yeah.
I mean, I've mentioned it on the show several times, so you have to forgive me, listeners, for saying it again. But when we get to talk about orbs, you can take like maybe 7 or 8 pictures, all facing the same way. Most of them will come out black, and then 1 or 2 in the middle will come out with what you call orbs and other bits in it. Now you'd think that every picture would come out with all that, or nothing at all. You know, that's kind of. And I've been told that there is a lot of activity there, and we've seen like you can't see them with your eyes, but when you take pictures, sometimes you get shapes in mist and everything which you can't see with your naked eyes. So,
well, that's interesting. I think because I don't know. I'm happy to share with you and your listeners now, but I've just finished a novel which will be published in October this year,
yes.
And it is called The Haunted Shore.
Right, I was going to ask you about that. So you've mentioned the title. I was going to say, or you're going to mention the title. So
I'm going to. But the interesting thing is that it's actually set next to Rendlesham Forest in Orford Ness.
Oh right, yes, yeah, I know.
And Shingle Street, which you'll know well.
Yes, yes.
But as this is a ghost story I've written, not a book about UFOs. But what I would say is that obviously I've had to do a huge amount of research into the area, particularly around Rendlesham itself, and I think there is something. I don't think anyone can look at the history of the area and not form the view that there is something really quite mysterious about Rendlesham Forest. And I spent some time actually there.
I wish I'd known. I'd have gone with you.
I'm sorry. It was actually about a year ago when I first had the idea for the book. But
yeah.
I wanted to go over to Orford Ness, and I got chatting to a ferryman, and I casually raised the question of the unusual lights over Rendlesham Forest, sort of in a half-hearted, jocular way, because I'm always interested to see how people respond. I don't want people to look and think, you're here looking into all that. I'm not going to tell you. I just sort of raised it, and he looked at me quite directly, and he said, "Oh, there are still weird lights over Rendlesham Forest."
There are. Yeah.
Is that right?
Yeah. Well, we were there. I'm saying we. There was. I think there was about 5 of us there one night. This is probably just under a year ago now. And we were watching which looked like a star. And it started moving, and then stopping and moving. And then there was another one started doing the same thing. So
did you get it on camera?
No, unfortunately, because they just look like stars. And really, I think if you tried to take a picture of it, I don't think anything would come out anyway, unless you've got a really good camera,
Yeah.
Which is always the problem.
It seems to be. I've never spent a night in Rendlesham Forest, but I would say that. It seems to me that there is, I don't know, I think that there are so many competing theories now about what went on out there, and there are so many stories that get built upon. It's hard to know really. I think the whole case is beginning to disappear into legend more than it is fact.
I'm not sure if you're aware, Neil, but Colonel Holt is a good friend of mine.
Oh, is he? No, I wasn't aware. No, I wasn't.
He's actually stayed here on a couple of occasions in our.
Oh my goodness.
In our home. And he's told me he still doesn't know what it was that there was. He's been on this show actually. When he was here last, he actually did record a show with me. I don't know.
Wow.
I did actually. I don't know if you remember, but we did a conference. I did a conference last September, and I did send you an invite for it, but I don't think you could make it.
Unfortunately, I couldn't. But I think I remember now. Yes, I've seen the pictures of the event as well. So Colonel Holt. What's really impressive to me about Colonel Holt's statement and his evidence is that it's never wavered. It's been always very consistent.
Yeah.
There are some witnesses involved, and I won't name them, but I think their stories have changed and wavered, and some of their stories have differentiated from the original statements they made at the time.
Yeah.
Now, I think that's also partly because And some of those witnesses were making those statements under a little bit of pressure. And I think they felt pressurized to change the statements at the time, because I think it's fairly well documented now and known that it was the Office of Special Investigations, which is the military arm, OSI, which is undoubtedly responsible for investigating UFOs.
In fact, Colonel Holt has been accused of being an OSI agent, but he swears that he hasn't, that he wasn't.
I think, I mean, I don't really see... That wouldn't really make a huge lot of sense, I don't think.
No, it doesn't. It's,
but the interesting question for me is who is now... and I have to say to your listeners, as I'm a writer of fiction, my fiction is informed by diligent research, and I am in no doubt whatsoever that the British government or factions of it are continuing to investigate and monitor the UFO problem.
Absolutely, yeah.
They always have done. They continue to do it. I don't know how they're doing it. I don't know which department's responsible. I have a sense that someone in the private sector is doing it for them on their behalf.
Yeah, I think
but they are doing it.
It's like Project Blue Book. When they said they stopped doing Project Blue Book, I don't think for one moment they stopped doing UFO investigations. In fact, a lot of the biggest reports were bypassing Blue Book and going to some different department. You know, and I think that's pretty clear now that that's what's been going on. And as we know, there's been some quite amazing bits of footage released lately and comments from the actual US services itself.
Yeah, so the interest, you mean the Nimitz Tic Tac videos? So, yeah, the interesting thing about that is the Navy, to me at least, is the Navy have just decided to confirm that these videos are real. Why do that in the middle of a global pandemic?
Yeah, didn't they do that before the pandemic though? I mean, if you believe what the pandemic is actually all about, but there you go, that's another subject.
I think it's strange that in the last, the statement was made, was it 2 weeks ago, when they said, we can confirm they're real.
Yeah. Oh, I see what you mean. Yeah, they've come out and said more, but I think they've been sort of edging this way for about a year or so now, haven't they, about releasing information.
But what's really interesting about these sightings to me is you have an advanced acceleration, aerodynamic and propulsion capability, using their words, craft that managed to evade 2 fighter jets. But all of these sightings occurred in an area where there were intense tests and military tests going on, which is exactly what happened in Rendlesham Forest.
Yeah.
You know, you've got 2 very high focused military areas, and the question then has to be, inevitably, are they seeing some sort of secret technology, or are these things observing our secret operations?
Yeah.
It's the eternal dilemma.
I know what you're saying, because Nick Redfern's just brought a book out recently saying about it was all military exercises. Having spoken to Colonel Holt, he disagrees entirely. He says he's got evidence that says, you know, that disagrees with that entirely. And I don't know if you know that Jim Penniston has got a big book out as well, the Rendlesham Enigma.
Yes. So I've not read either of those books. I am familiar with Nick Redfern's suggestion that these were some sort of holographic test that was going on, and that scientists were brought up from Porton Down who were actually there before, and that. So I haven't read his book, so it would be unfair of me to offer a review on that. But I do think one thing I can tell you is, many of your listeners may remember Georgina Bruni's book on the Rendlesham affair. You Can't Tell the People.
That's right. Yeah, it's one of the best on the subject, actually, of the earlier books.
I think it's the definitive book on the subject. Georgina was a friend of mine.
Oh, really? I didn't know that, Neil.
Yeah, small world. But she very kindly came to speak at an event that I arranged when I was studying at Oxford, and she came to Oxford and gave us a fascinating talk on the subject, and she handed me a copy of her book, which I've got sitting beside me now, and on the front page, on the inside the cover, she wrote, "The truth is in here." And I think what's interesting to me is that we had many conversations at the time. I had conversations with the great Graham Birdsall, who you may recall, ran UFO magazine, and I think Georgina must have had a really interesting conversation with the base commander. What was his name?
Gordon Williams.
Gordon Williams, yeah. So I'm not completely convinced that we've heard the full story from Gordon Williams yet. Although I know.
Yeah, I don't think he passed away, I think, last year.
Oh, did he?
Yeah.
That's a shame. I wasn't aware of that.
Colonel Holt went to, I'm not sure if he actually went to his funeral, but he was trying to get some information, because he was actually told that he had some information, but I'm not sure if he actually obtained it. So
well, that's a great shame. I wasn't aware of that, but it seems to me that he must have known something.
Yeah.
About what happened there. But, Colonel Holt, as I said, his statement has been consistent, hasn't wavered, and some of the other statements have varied slightly.
Yeah.
And rather now from hearing from the more established witnesses that we all know who they are, I think it would be really, really useful if people involved on that night, on those 3 nights, came out of the woodwork and decided to share what they know.
Yeah.
And am I right in saying that Colonel Holt managed to track down some radar operators that said they saw something?
Yeah, there is something in the Holt Perspective book about.
Right.
He did get some, and I believe he's got some more information coming along soon. And I'm hoping to have him back on the show again in December. So.
What nature of information?
That I don't know. He hasn't told me. He hasn't told me everything. He does say he has got some new information. So I've got to wait like everybody else. So.
What they need is the radar tapes, I think.
Yeah, I mean whether they're available, or one would assume they should be. Now in Jim Peniston's book, which is very, very detailed, he does actually go into great pains to actually put everything that everyone said over the years into the notes at the back of each chapter, and they are very, very detailed, and you can see how people's stories have changed over the years.
Yes.
And it is actually quite telling as to what we're on with the internet. There's been so many interviews and things that people involved and not involved have done over the years, that you can see how the stories have just basically changed. Some got very, very exaggerated, as you know.
Yes,
and some one particular person wasn't there at all, and that's been proven really over the last couple of years.
Mentioning no names.
Yeah, well, I wouldn't mind mentioning the name because I was actually mixed up in the exposing of him. But
oh, really? Right. It's a fractious old business. The UFO subject in the UK. But listen, one thing I've actually tried to look at it very dispassionately, and I do think they're still involved, as in I think our government is still involved in the subject.
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
And I think that there's a curious it's the curious nature of the UFO subject that if you take an interest in it, it does take an interest in you. Absolutely, yeah, definitely. Well, that should actually take us onto your next book, The Watchers, isn't it? Which is basically a UFO story, a true UFO story, which happened. Well, I don't know if your listeners are aware, but obviously in 1977 there was a huge wave of UFO sightings all over the country, but in Wales in particular, in southwest Wales in Pembrokeshire, there was a substantial number of sightings, and this came to my attention where I'm 39 now, but this came to my attention when I was about 16 and I was at school in South Wales, and I got speaking to actually my drama teacher at the time, who was a wonderful, wonderful woman, Kath Craner. She told me about some kids that she I asked her once, do you believe in UFOs? I don't know why I asked her. And she said, well, yes, actually, she said, you should go and talk to, and she gave me the name of an old pupil. And she said, because he saw a UFO, and he was absolutely convinced. And his father was the reverend in this local village, it was called Bishopston, this village. Anyway, I went and tracked him down, and he was about my age now, when I found him. And I said, I've been told you saw a UFO when you were in 1977. And he said, yes. He said, it was the same year as all the things that happened in Pembrokeshire. I said, okay, what did you see? And he said, well, my friend and I were picking blackberries. It was the last day of the summer holidays, and we were picking blackberries in the fields that were very close to where I lived at the time. And he said, we turned and saw at the bottom of the field, it was a sparklingly bright, blue-skied afternoon. It was a Sunday, I think. He said we saw an object that looked like a single-decker bus. He said it was curved at both ends, so cigar-shaped. He said it was sort of dull grey. And he said it lifted up from behind the hedge and just hung there. And they were about 50 yards away. Anyway, he said they were terrified, and they ran. And they told the story to to one of the boys' fathers, who was the reverend at the time of the village. And he went back there with him. And I think, his father, being a religious man, didn't know what to think, but he was convinced that his son was telling the truth. So they told the newspaper. And I went to the newspaper office at the time, and I found a photograph actually in their records that showed these two boys sitting on a flattened, what appeared to be burned patch of grass.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
And I was 16, 17, but I was massively intrigued by this. And then obviously I got his testimony, and that was interesting to me. And he said, you must have heard about what happened in 1977. And of course I hadn't. But I then looked into it, and I discovered the famous Broadhaven Primary School sighting, which occurred obviously in close to Broadhaven in Littlehaven, in February that year.
It was February. I was going to say, what month was that? Because I actually remember 1977 very well, actually. To me, the big thing that year was Elvis Presley dying in August. But
oh, really? Was it? I could be wrong, but I'm pretty sure it happened. Yes, it happened in February 1977. Right. And the essence of it was, at the time, this was called the Dyfed Triangle, when the area was called Dyfed. But at the time, you have to remember, all these sightings took place over the course of a day. It was a Friday afternoon.
Yeah.
And essentially what happened is that some of the kids came running in and said to the headmaster they had seen an object pop up from behind the bushes at the end of their school field and across another bit of pasture land behind it.
Yeah.
And they described a cigar-shaped craft with a dome covering the middle third. And, they were, some of the kids described a sort of strange desire to run away from it. And some of them were in awe and wonderment, and some of them were actually quite frightened. The headmaster, Ralph Llewellyn, actually has written an account of what they saw. And it's really interesting because I've spent so much time in Broadhaven, and I've visited the school, and I've been through their records. And I actually have a copy of his original statement, which he wrote that day in the diary of the school.
Right. Yeah.
And he was adamant that the kids were telling the truth. He didn't know what they'd seen, but bearing in mind it was a Friday, it was raining, the conditions weren't good. But what happened is the kids went home, they told their parents what they'd seen, and the parents told the police, I believe. And on the Monday, the headmaster separated them all and had them draw what they'd seen under exam conditions. And they all drew the same thing.
Yeah, they all drew roughly the same thing. I don't know. I do remember it. Yeah, it's
very much.
Yeah, it's very interesting, isn't it, that all the kids would stick to that story too.
Well, the thing is, you have to remember that, they were young. They all watched probably Doctor Who at that time.
Mm-hmm.
They all, would have watched science fiction.
And Star Trek and all that sort of stuff, yeah.
All of that. So and actually one of the cute drawings, some of the drawings show what appears to be a figure standing next to the graft. And one of these figures happens to have pointed ears. What a surprise. Which is really quite sweet. But what is interesting is that there's a common theme with the pictures. They all seem to have a dome, and it generally looks like it's cigar shaped. It looks like a typical flying saucer, basically. Now, the witnesses haven't changed their view on what they've seen. Some witnesses, like David Davis, have been more open about what he saw, but David, who I know is, I think, a fantastic witness. He's been consistent in his story; it has never wavered. And some of the other kids, although they don't talk about it now, they have been reunited since. They were back in the 1990s, and they confirmed and they stuck by their story. Now, when I was last in Little Haven, I do actually go back quite often. I'll be going back there, hopefully, when we're out of lockdown. Because I happen to think there is something very unusual about the area innately. I don't know where it comes from, but it's a bit like Rendlesham Forest. And in fact, when I was down there last, which was in November, I got chatting to a lady who just bought a house there, and she said to me, "Oh, is it true this is a UFO hotspot?" And I said, "Well, I don't know. What do you think?" And she said, "I've seen one." Yeah. And she described something she'd seen, and she said, "God, that's really weird." But the headmaster, Ralph Llewellyn, he's also dead now. I am told that he went to his deathbed regretting never going outside to look when the kids had called him.
Yeah, as you would.
Well, you would, but what's interesting about the sighting, again, what does it have in common with Rendlesham and the Nimitz encounters? RAF Brawdy was just across the bay,
sure.
and there was a top secret US naval station, and we know that the Navy are never far away from this subject. And that was just across the water. Yeah. So it does raise a question as to, did something they were testing go awry?
Yeah. I wanted to actually ask you a question about the Colonel Corso that's in the book, the character. Was he based on the actual Colonel Corso in the Roswell book? After
no.
Roswell? It wasn't. It's just a coincidence, is it?
It is actually, yes, a coincidence. I think maybe I think The Watchers is very much a novel. It's my love letter to the UFO subject. So I've peppered it with allusions to famous cases and famous people. So there's a Corso in there, and I think that's probably a subliminal reference to the original Colonel Corso. Yeah,
because when I was reading, I thought, I wonder if this is the real Colonel Corso that's coming into this.
Well, I wanted people to wonder about that. And there is not to give away any spoilers, but there's a scene later in the book which is deliberately modelled on the alleged abduction of, is it Jim Taylor in Scotland?
Yes, another one. The torn trousers man.
Yeah, but the two objects he claimed came out of the craft and tugged at his leg.
Yeah.
There's a scene in The Watchers which alludes to that, but the essence of the book is very much based on the original witness reports from within the so-called Welsh Triangle. And I actually interviewed many of the people who made the original reports. I did a piece for the One Show, an interview for the 40th anniversary of the sightings a couple of years back.
I saw that, yeah.
Oh, you saw that, right? But it's what emerged from my research on this case is a document which I think is, many people might be familiar with, which is a document which shows that the MOD in London specifically asked the military police to consider whether there was enough evidence involved here for a discreet inquiry in the area.
Yeah.
And that, again, is evidence that the British military, and not the British, specifically the British military police, have investigated UFO sightings.
Sure, yeah. Oh,
and
I have no doubts about that at all.
Why do you have that view?
Me?
Yeah.
I don't know. I mean, I don't know if you are aware, but I saw a UFO in 1967.
Oh, right. No, I wasn't aware. Oh, sorry. What did you...
It was in Essex. I was living in Essex at the time, and I was coming home from my girlfriend's at the time. And it was early hours of the morning, or dark anyway. It's probably after midnight. And there was a big...
Yeah.
I mean, I've told this story on the show a few times, so if you've heard it before, excuse me. But it was a big... it was an oval orange object going across the sky. Now, I'm talking about 1967. And it wasn't an aeroplane, and it was completely silent, but the orange... it's very difficult. It wasn't a one-tone orange. It was all different tones of orange going round.
Yeah.
It was like an incandescent light rather than
Oh, my goodness.
rather than a bright light. But it was a large oval object, you know.
Gosh.
So,
and it convinced you beyond any doubt?
Well, that convinced me beyond any doubt. That really made me start to... I think it really got me into the subject because I started, well, I think I'd been reading a few books, but I think it was around about that time or just after that Eric von Daniken's book came out, Chariots of the Gods, and that's when I really got hooked, you know.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I've told this story a few times, so if you've heard it all before.
No. Well, I have to say, it's one of the strange ironies that, you know, you have an intense interest in something and you put yourself in a situation to see things, and I have done, and I tend not to see anything.
Right, They usually tend to happen when you're not expecting it. Yeah,
I think that's right. But one of the interesting things is that in the Welsh sightings in particular, there were a couple of reports of men in dark suits calling on some of the witnesses.
Yeah.
This happened at the Havenport Hotel, and the witness there said that the skin of these individuals, she said, looked like a woman's skin.
Yeah, it's like a very smooth skin. Yeah, I've heard that before.
Right. Well, that's how she described it to me. And she said they arrived in a car that was a big silver car. And she said that the car, they hadn't heard it crunch on the gravel outside when it pulled up, but normally they would. And they asked very odd questions. They said, we've come to talk to you about your UFO sighting. Her mother had basically seen an object that was sitting behind their hotel and had observed some humanoid figures, 7 foot tall, silver clad suits and blacked out faces. By which I mean like black visors covering their faces. So they came and said, we've come to talk to you about your UFO sighting. And she'd actually written to her local MP at the time about this, and somebody from RAF Brawdy separately came to see her. And I think that was probably, looking back on it now, I think that was probably in relation to the MOD saying, can you go and see? Because her story was all over the press, you see, so that's how they became aware of it. But anyway, these two men turned up and produced a map, and they said, we've come to talk to you about your UFO sighting, but we can't stay now. Which is just really odd behaviour.
Yeah.
And she said it was odd behaviour. It made no sense. It's like, why would you arrive? Why would you say this? Why are you behaving in this way? And she said, the two men, she said they looked like they had like women's skin. No sign of visible shaving, she meant.
Yeah.
And I thought that was odd. But what was odder to me was that around that time, I was making a trip from Swansea to the Gower in South Wales on a bus, and I asked the bus to stop. It was a hot summer's day, and this was exactly when I was doing research into all of this. It was a hot summer's day, and I asked the bus driver if he could stop before the stop, because I wanted to get off the bus because it was really hot, and I just wanted to walk. And he said, yes, that's fine. And I heard a voice behind me say, and I can still hear it now, I think I'll get off here too as well. or I think I'll get off here as well, to be grammatically correct. Anyway, I didn't think anything about it. I got off, and I walked, and I then looked over my shoulder, and standing behind me by a distance of, I would say, 20 yards, was a person standing there wearing a black suit, no hat, black tie, clear, he was quite pale, and he was standing exactly where the bus had dropped us. And this was a very rural area. We were next to a main road, and then there was a sort of bank of green grass, which is what I was walking on, and then adjacent to that, on my left-hand side, was a big playing field. He was standing right next to the hedge, which led into that field.
Wow.
And he wasn't moving. He was literally just standing there staring at me. It was bizarre.
Well, that's enough to give you the creeps anyway, isn't it?
Well, it did. It was a hot summer's day. I can't remember what day it was, but it was, and I just remember there was something about the whole thing that felt really weird to me. And at the time, I got home, it was a short walk. Oh, that's right, so I continued walking, and I looked over my shoulder again, he was still there. When I got to the part of the grass which turned into a pavement, I looked over my shoulder, and he was gone. I then went home. As I got home, actually my mother was pulling out the drive of the car. I got into the car. I said, can you just drive around the block? I'm going to see if I'm going to show you something. I'm looking for somebody, basically. We drove around the block. We drove around this playing field. This person wasn't in that field, and he wasn't anywhere.
Just disappeared.
He had disappeared. Now, I was struck by that. I can still remember it vividly. I was struck by it, and I was struck by something that happened when The Watchers, my novel, was published. So, this is a difficult one to relate, but somebody I know, who is, shall we say, in government,
right.
Who's a friend, read the book and was on a plane travelling somewhere, and he was on the plane, it was coming into land, he was reading the book, and a lady sitting next to him on the plane, who he really hadn't acknowledged or observed in any way, sort of noticed in any odd way during the course of the journey, basically said, would you mind if you ask my interest, what is the particular nature of your interest in this subject? And he said to me, it was only when I got off the plane that I realised that she was dressed completely in black.
All right.
And I have wondered about that. I have wondered about it because I have a theory when it comes to this peculiar subject, Men in Black, that whoever is behind their peculiar behaviour, it's all completely intentional, because their behaviour is so bizarre that anybody like me or yourself or any of your listeners who even begin to describe ever seeing them comes across sounding completely mad.
Yeah, I was going to say that. It's because you think to yourself, am I looking at this right in the right? Yeah, you probably think to yourself, am I mad as well, don't you?
Yes. Yeah. I think that's probably, but I think that's entirely intentional.
To be sort of thinking that way in the first place. Where have these people come from? And
it's very odd, but it's.
But I mean, the fact that he hadn't really noticed her on the plane all that time, and then she suddenly sort of piped up. So
yes, and she took the book from him actually, and she looked at it, and he said to me, it struck him as odd. Obviously, I can't say really reveal too much more about identities, but he said it struck him as being really, really weird.
I know you're a bit pushed for time now. Can we just move on to your next book, The Lost Village? Yes. We're back with Harry Price and Sarah Gray again.
Yeah,
now,
so,
I don't know too much about this book because I haven't got to it yet myself. So.
Right. So there's an abandoned village in the middle of Salisbury Plain called Imber, and basically Imber was evacuated. Every inhabitant there was told they had to get out at short notice just before the First World War, because the military was sequestering the land because they wanted to use it for military training purposes.
Right.
So all the villagers were chucked out. Some of them died, one or two of them died of a broken heart, felt they could never leave. And this is a purely fictional ghost story that I've written using Harry Price and my narrator Sarah, purely because after the Ghost Hunters, I felt that there were unresolved questions about the narrator Sarah. There were unresolved questions about Harry and his motives.
Because there were obviously more stories to them both as well, weren't there?
Yeah, because they obviously would have gone on many investigations, and my publisher said, we'd love you to write a sequel. And so I thought, okay, I'll write the sequel and it will be completely fictitious. But actually, the more research I did about Imber, the more ghost stories I discovered are actually associated with it. So what I've done is involved real life ghost stories from the village of Imber in a fictional Harry Price setting. And I'm very proud of this book. I actually think it's a better book than The Ghost Hunters, ironically, just because, as a writer, you're constantly learning. And by the time I came to write this book, I'd already written two others. So hopefully you develop as a writer as you go on.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to getting to it. I know.
So, have you bought it?
I've got all of them.
Oh,
yeah.
great.
Yeah. Now I've got when I got the Ghost Hunters, I started reading this. I thought I've got to get the rest of your books now. Like I did mention that I haven't normally read fiction, but as I say, you sort of envelope truth into your books anyway, which is very very attractive to me as far as reading fictional books. But,
there's just so many. The thing is, there are so many wonderful, true life paranormal experiences out there, aren't there?
There are.
That it makes you wonder why more of them haven't been made into. Where's the Rendlesham Forest movie?
Well, don't say that. there's a couple on the horizon, I do believe.
Yeah, I've heard this might be the case. Are they? What are they? Are they motion pictures or TV?
There's a television series, I believe, with which is coming along. I thought it was supposed to be out by now, but it hasn't appeared yet.
Is that being filmed?
I presume I thought they'd finished it, and it would have been out by now, but it hasn't appeared yet. There's also a couple of other films, documentaries coming out, which I don't really want to go into on here, but
really?
Yeah. But that's probably for another show, because I've got hopefully got Jim Penniston coming back on in February. He's been on the show before. Colonel Holt's coming on hopefully in December. I've got hopefully Gary Osborne coming on in end of August, and they're all going to be Rendlesham related. So a lot of that's going to be covered, like what's going on. I think over those. Over those.
I really look forward to those, but I have to say I'm wondering, we've got the Welsh Triangle, we've got Rendlesham, we've got Bonnie Bridge, we've got, you name it. The question is, where's the next hotspot going to be? And
I think there's hotspots all over the place. So I think it happens all the time, and especially everyone seems to think that UFOs only happen in America, but they don't. They're all over the world. And every country in the world's got its biggest hotspot. And I don't know what your beliefs are about what happened at Roswell. Have you got any beliefs in that? If it was actually a spacecraft?
Well, the Roswell case is, I think...
That's a show on its own, I know.
Yeah, no, it's a show on its own, but I have to say, the interesting thing to me about Roswell is that they've recently discovered, I think I'm right in saying, that numerous architectural digs have discovered things like military buttons at the landing site. Shows they were there. Fine. Well, they would have been there if they were recovering a sort of top secret balloon. I think that I think that there are so many questionable aspects of the case, but one thing for me is really quite compelling, and that is the fact that one of the greatest UFO researchers ever, Stanton Friedman, was clearly utterly convinced in the case.
Yeah.
And as he was the original investigator, I respected Stanton a great deal.
Yeah. Did you ever meet him? I was lucky enough to meet him. Yeah.
Yeah,
no,
I did meet him. Really lovely man, actually. He's genuinely, one of the best. His passing is a great loss to ufology. But in the same way that Graham Birdsall's passing was a great loss.
Yeah, I never met Graham Birdsall. But,
he went before his time, very much so. But his UFO magazine was instrumental.
It was. I used to read quite a few of those back in the day.
Yeah. So, are you finding yourself in Rendlesham Forest often?
Well, I have not recently. I haven't. But if ever you fancy a trip over at some point, give me a call.
Thank you very much.
We could go up in the dead of night and everything. And
I'd love to see.
I don't know if you've heard of Brenda Butler. She wrote the book Skycrash. Well, she's a friend of mine, so we've actually spent quite a few hours up there at night.
And is Jenny Randall still involved in the case?
She doesn't live in this area. I think she lives up north somewhere.
Right.
But I don't believe she's sort of. I don't know how much she's involved in things like this. I think she's getting on a bit now, isn't she?
Right.
So I don't know if she gets about. I mean, so we're all getting older, but Brenda still traipses around the forest, sort of about twice a week, I think.
Really?
Yeah. Whether she's been doing it on this lockdown, I don't know, but.
Well, that is dedication, isn't it?
Yeah.
And I'm curious to know actually, what is her basic view on what was behind the happenings in the forest?
Well, yes, she did the original investigations with Dot Street, and she does think that something happened there. But I think what happened with her book, I think a lot of it got, she was fed a lot of misinformation. And I think it kind of got bogged down in the misinformation, the book Sky Crash. And unfortunately, a lot of it got fed out to the public via that book. And a lot of it was sort of incorrect, if I can say it kindly, although it's an interesting book. But as I say, a lot of it was, they were fed a lot of misinformation, and, it's difficult to sort of say anything more than that, really.
It's great that you've read, Georgina Brooke.
That is one of the best books out there, really.
And Nick Pope has also written a new book on Rendlesham. Well, not so new now, I guess.
Oh, the Encounter in Rendlesham Forest, yeah.
Yes, that's fairly thorough.
Yeah, I actually speak with Nick quite often, to be honest, because he was actually helping quite a bit on this other exposure of the fraud, but which is another thing on its own. But
yes, I imagine. I know what you're referring to. I'm just not mentioning anything.
No. Sure. I mean, it has been mentioned on this, but I don't really. It's sort of out of the context of this show, really. It's. I mean, if we were doing a show on Rendlesham, it probably wouldn't be a problem. But
I think if any of your listeners were curious to follow up on the stories I present in The Ghost Hunters and The Lost Village and The Watchers, then I think. They couldn't do wrong with starting with, looking into the Welsh Triangle sightings of 1977.
Absolutely,
I think they're really fantastic.
And you got Peter Paget. Did you ever meet him?
I didn't meet Peter, no.
He's a bit of a character.
Well, I've just read an up-to-date version that he's published of his book, The Welsh Triangle. And, has he been on the show?
No, he hasn't, not yet. I have met him. I can't really mention too much about it, but I have met him. But there's been a few sort of anomalies and things around his story. But
yes. Well, I think that, let's just say some of the more lurid stories.
I think you know what I'm talking about. But
Yes. It's the best book about the 1977 sightings in my view is The Dubbed Enigma by Randall Jones Pugh. If you can get hold of The Dubbed Enigma, it's a fantastic, intelligent read.
Yeah.
And it's written by a qualified vet who was on the scene at the time, lived in the area, knew many of the witnesses, and it's rigorous and detailed.
Yeah, definitely. As I say, anyone out there, you've got a website also, haven't you, Neil?
Oh yes, which I'll have to update sometime very shortly, soon. But there'll be new information appearing on it.
Yeah. Well, what I'll do when this goes out next Monday, I'll put some links on my Paranormal Dimensions page for your books and also for your whatever links you can send me or whatever. But just when you go, I mean, I know you're pushed because you've got to do something, but I'll just mention the other book. It's called The Burning House, which is another based on a true story.
Yes. Well, I don't know if you've ever been to Loch Ness.
I have. Yeah. I haven't seen the monster though.
No. What did you think of Loch Ness?
Oh, it's a beautiful place. I mean, in fact, it's massive. I didn't actually realise it was as big as it was at the time.
Yeah, it's really, really sprawling. It's but it is beautiful. I agree. So
it's usually raining when you go, but.
Yeah, well, it was. Well, actually, when I went, it was snowing, and but it was quite creepy actually because we stayed in a hotel that looked like it was something out of The Shining when we arrived with the snow coming down. But here you have The Burning House is actually for your listeners is a story about a house called Boleskine House, which is an ancient Scottish manor which did belong to Aleister Crowley. The occultist and magician, and once described as the most wickedest man in the world. So it's a novel based on demonology, basically, and his escapades in and around Loch Ness, but it's set in the modern day. And I went there because I wrote the book because I discovered that Boleskine House had obviously burned down. It's now being rebuilt by a charitable trust, which is great actually that they're doing that because it was a spectacular manner. But when I visited Loch Ness, obviously I was keen to understand why Boleskine House, in much the same way as Borley Rectory, was a place that the locals seemed to shun and stay away from and tell fearful stories about. And we were staying at the hotel, and I think that what had happened is somebody in the hotel had Googled my name and I got there, or somehow they knew I wrote books about this.
Right.
And they came over. It was a waitress actually came over. I was having dinner, and she said, "I really hope you don't mind me asking, but are you here because of Boleskine House?" And I said yes. And she said, "Oh, are you going there? Are you planning on going up there?" I said yes.
Obviously.
And she says to me, "Oh, but I hope you don't mind if I say a prayer for you."
Oh.
And I thought, "Oh my God!"
Yeah.
This is like in the middle of dinner. Anyway, but it was. I said, "Well, thank you very much," But I went there, and there was an odd feel to the place, I have to say, because bearing in mind this is a house on the banks of Loch Ness where there have been innumerable stories of not just strange happenings but actually tragedies down the years. And I just wanted to write a really, really dark novel about a house that had been owned by a demonologist. And it's quite a violent book. I would just say that, but it's I'm very proud of it.
Yeah, well, I'm looking forward to it. It's got quite a catching cover on it actually, The Burning House. But looks interesting.
Oh, good. I'm glad you think so.
Yeah. Well, I'm hoping that at one point I might actually meet you and you can sign them all for me.
I'd love that. I would love to do that. Maybe in Sudbury or somewhere close to Renderson.
Yeah, somewhere, if you're ever down this way. Now, let's just finish up on your new book. You've just completed it, I understand.
Yeah.
I know you're eager to rush off. I know you've got something else on, haven't you?
Yesterday I completed the revisions to the new manuscript. So, when you're writing a book, I've been working on this book for the last 18 months, so it feels quite nice actually to suddenly put it to bed. You know, when you feel you've done the best you can with it. This is the thing when you're writing fiction; you're constantly rewriting.
Yeah.
But yeah, the Haunted Shore is published in October. It's a ghost story set in deepest, darkest, desolate Suffolk at Shingle Street, which was obviously an area again that was abandoned during the war and was mined by the military, and which is home to so many legends. And obviously, it's very close to Rendlesham Forest and Orford Ness, where they were testing all sorts of strange and weird military technology.
It's a weird area when you just look at it and the sort of the pagodas and everything over there.
Oh, it really is. It really is weird. And I was there, as I say, about a year ago doing research, and you know, there were some. I always love to begin my stories with location first. It's always the location that gets me. But actually, the story that I tell in this book is part military ghost story, but it's also a domestic story about something which is a rather real and horrible terror in many people's lives, and that's domestic abuse.
Wow.
So the story actually revolves around a woman from London who's come home to Shingle Street only to discover that her brother is employing a caregiver to look after her father, and the caregiver has been moved into the home and is basically running the roost and is there for a very particular and not very nice reason. So I honestly think it's a fear that many of us have in lives, which is putting our parents into the care of strangers. And so I've really tried to explore that in this book. I almost wanted to call it The Care of Strangers, but I was told that wasn't a great title.
Right.
So.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a fascinating subject. I must say, all of them are. Have you got any, do you think they'll make any more films or TV series out of any of them?
One of the books is currently being developed as a TV show, but I'm not allowed to say which one.
Okay.
Annoyingly, but if there was one book I'd love to see become a film rather than a TV series, it would be The Haunted Shore, which obviously isn't published yet because it is. I'm very proud of it just because, you know, I hope what it does is it fuses home horrors with landscape horrors, and I think, you know, if you can get that blend right, you've got a good hook. Yeah.
In actual fact, I've got to say, your titles of the books are actually sort of very grabbing. They do sort of grip you, just the titles alone.
Do they?
Well, they do me anyway.
Do you have a favourite one?
Well, so far, I think The Ghost Hunters is so far, because I'm only halfway through The Watchers. But so I'll let you know if you talk to me in about 6 months, and I'll let you know which one was my favourite. But
thank you very much.
I think the way you write is brilliant, actually, though, Neil. I really like it. You know, as I say, I didn't think I could get into fiction. As I say, they're more than fiction anyway. But I can't actually wait to sort of finish one and get on to the next one.
Oh, thank you. But as there are so many, as Rendlesham is referenced in The Watchers, maybe if I send you a copy, you could send a copy on to Charles Holt.
Absolutely, yeah, sure.
He might appreciate it.
Yeah, I'm sure. I've probably got a signature here for you somewhere. I've got some stickers and things. But he may well be. I mean, I was trying to get him back over here this year, but obviously with this lockdown and everything, it's not been possible. Nobody's been going anywhere, so maybe next year. No, it
is a very sad and troubling time.
Yeah, but hopefully you'll get to meet him one day.
I would love to. Yeah. Yes, I would love to.
Anyway, now I know you've got to get on, haven't you? You've got something else planned.
I have a call, unfortunately, that I have to get onto in a couple of minutes. Right. But it has been wonderful talking to you.
Yeah, and you, Neil. And I do hope to get to meet you, and you can sign my books for me at some point. And
I would love to do that, and I would love to come back on your show at a convenient time. Yeah. Or maybe have a chat with one of your other guests as well.
Yeah, sure, absolutely. Yeah, in fact, perhaps I'll get you back on as a co-presenter or something with me.
Well, I'd be delighted.
Like that. Anyway, Neil, thank you very much, and I'll say farewell to you now, and let you get on with what you've got to do. And
thank you so much for having me on. And,
it's been an absolute pleasure. As I say, this one was a very exciting one for me. I was looking forward to this one. It's a shame you've got to rush off, but there you go.
I know. I'm so sorry, but thank you so much for having me.
Thank you, Neil.
I'll talk to you soon, and thanks to your listeners.
Yeah, thanks, Neil. Take care of yourself.
Okay.
Yeah. Cheers. Bye-bye. Bye-bye. Okay, you've been listening to Paranormal Dimensions on the Paranormal UK Radio Network. I'm David Young. Hope you'll join us again next week. Thank you. Goodbye.
Paranormal Dimensions is as bright and powerful as our celestial star, the sun. And although it's expending thousands of pounds of energy every minute of the day, have no fear. There's plenty left.
Paranormal Dimensions is a regular feature on Mondays on the Paranormal UK Radio Network.